Why Nietzsche says leaving the herd makes you dangerous. Why do we fear being different? Why do we cling to the comfort of the crowd, even when we feel it crushing our spirit? Friedrich Nietzsche, the razor-edged philosopher who dared to stare directly into the abyss of human nature, believed there is something inherently dangerous yet profoundly necessary about breaking away from the herd. You see, Nietzsche didn't just mean the herd as a group of people. He meant it as a mindset, a gravitational force that pulls us towards sameness, obedience, and safety. And according to him, the moment you choose to walk alone, genuinely alone, you do not just become free, you become dangerous. Not because you intend harm, but because your very existence exposes the illusion that the herd is all there is. Let's start with a brutal truth. Most people don't want to think. They want to be told what to think. They want certainty, direction, structure, and society, modern or ancient, understands this. It offers order in exchange for obedience, belonging in exchange for conformity. You're told what to believe, what to fear, what to aspire to. And if you question it, you're not just disagreeing, you're threatening the entire system. Nietzsche referred to this as slave morality, a morality born not out of strength, but out of fear and resentment. It's the morality of the herd, the morality that values humility over greatness, safety over truth, sameness over excellence. And the moment you step outside of it, the herd turns on you. Because deep down, you remind them of everything they gave up to belong.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But Nietzsche wasn't advocating for arrogance or selfishness. He was calling us to a higher form of life, what he called the path of the Übermensch, the overman. This isn't a supervillain or tyrant. It's a person who creates their own values, who lives in alignment with their deepest truth, regardless of whether it's accepted or understood. The overman doesn't ask, "What should I do?" but "What must I become?" And that question is terrifying, because it forces you to leave the maps behind, to stop being a reflection and become a source, to stop mimicking and start creating. Now think about your own life. How many of your beliefs are inherited? How many of your goals are borrowed? How much of your identity is shaped by what others expect of you? Nietzsche's challenge is not to rebel for rebellion's sake. It's to become so radically honest with yourself that everything false begins to fall away. And when it does, you're left with something raw, something real, something that can't be faked. That's what makes you dangerous. Because a person who no longer needs the herd can no longer be controlled by it. But here's the twist. The herd isn't just external. It lives inside of you. It's the voice that says, "Don't stand out." The fear that whispers, "What if they don't like you?" The impulse to scroll, to numb, to fit in. Nietzsche knew that leaving the herd isn't just physical separation, it's psychological revolution. But it's the death of the old self. And that death is painful. Because the herd gives you identity, even if it's a false one. It gives you rules, even if they're cages. And when you step away, you don't just lose comfort, you lose who you thought you were. But what you gain is everything. You gain the chance to become who you actually are, not who you were told to be. You begin to see with your own eyes, feel with your own heart, think with your own mind. And that is power. Not the kind of power that dominates others, but the kind of power that can't be dominated. The kind of power that walks into a room and doesn't need approval, that doesn't need validation, that stands tall even when standing alone. Let me ask you something honestly, quietly. If you stripped away everything you've been taught to want, what would be left? What remains when the applause stops, when the tribe no longer cheers, when the system no longer rewards your obedience? That silence, that space is where your real life begins. And most people never get there. They're too afraid of losing what was never theirs to begin with. Nietzsche says that leaving the herd makes you dangerous because it makes you free. And freedom terrifies those who have built their lives around chains. The herd says, "Stay with us and we'll protect you." But what they're really saying is, "Stay with us and we won't feel so bad about not leaving ourselves." So you have a choice. Stay where it's warm, predictable, and safe, or walk into the wilderness of your own becoming. One path leads to comfort, the other leads to greatness. But you can't have both. The abyss stares back. How solitude transforms you into someone society can't understand when you leave the herd. The first thing that greets you isn't freedom, it's silence. A deafening, echoing silence. The noise of the crowd disappears, and suddenly you can hear your own breath, your own thoughts, your own fear. This is where Nietzsche's abyss begins. It's not a place of monsters or nightmares. It's a place of truth. A place where all the illusions you once clung to, your identity, your beliefs, your borrowed ambitions begin to dissolve. And what's left isn't clarity. Not yet. What's left is the terrifying realization that you don't really know who you are. Because up until now, you've been defined by contrast, by how well you fit into the world others built. But once you step outside that world, the mirror breaks. And you're forced to see yourself not as the world sees you, but as you truly are. That's why so few people make it through this part of the journey. Because solitude doesn't just isolate you from others, it confronts you with yourself. And the self, when stripped of all masks and performances, is not always a pleasant thing to meet. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He said, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. This isn't just poetry, it's a warning. The process of becoming who you truly are requires an inner descent. You must face your own complacency, your own cowardice, your own complicity in the very herd you're trying to leave behind. But here's the paradox. It's only through that descent through the abyss that transformation happens. True individuality isn't found in rebellion or aesthetics or some edgy lifestyle. It's found in the crucible of solitude, where you're forced to ask the questions that no one else can answer for you. What do I value when no one is watching? What do I believe when there's no tribe to agree with me? What kind of life am I willing to suffer for, even if no one ever rewards me for it? These are not easy questions. They burn. They unravel. They reveal how much of you was built to please others, to survive, to be liked. But once you go through that fire, something sacred happens. You stop living reactively. You stop adjusting yourself to fit the expectations of others. You stop needing someone else's permission to exist. And that's when society's confusion begins. Because now you are no longer understandable in conventional terms. You don't fit the neat boxes. You don't play by the rules. You don't crave the same things. You've become what society both envies and fears, an individual. That's what Nietzsche meant when he said the person of the future will be one who has overcome themselves. Not someone who seeks power over others, but someone who has achieved sovereignty over their own being. That kind of person is dangerous, not violent, but unshakable, but not chaotic, but deeply ordered from within. And when you encounter someone like that, you feel it, you recognize it. Maybe you've even seen glimpses of it in yourself. But the challenge is sustaining it, because the world will constantly try to pull you back. You'll be tempted by comfort, by applause, by the seductive gravity of belonging. You'll be told you've changed. You'll be asked to tone it down, soften your edges, come back to the center. But once you've seen the abyss, once you've lived in the silence and faced yourself fully, you can't pretend anymore. You can't unknow what you've learned. You can't unsee the games people play to avoid their own awakening. So ask yourself this: are you willing to be misunderstood in order to be real? Are you willing to walk alone, not because you hate others, but because you refuse to lie to them or to yourself? Are you willing to let go of the version of you that made others comfortable so you can become the version that sets you free? That's the cost of becoming an individual. And that's why Nietzsche said it's dangerous. Because a truly awakened person challenges everything the herd stands for, not with force, but with presence. The birth of the Overman, why becoming yourself is the most revolutionary act to Nietzsche. The highest calling of the human being is not to obey, not to fit in, not even to be good in the conventional moral sense. It is to become. Not in the shallow, commercialized sense of becoming your best self, but in the existential, soul-wrenching, transformative sense of becoming who you truly are beyond all masks and systems and inherited values. This is the path of the Übermensch, the Overman, not a literal figure to be idolized, but a symbol of what a human being can become when they transcend the conditioning of the herd and take responsibility for creating their own values. And that, Nietzsche believed, is the most revolutionary act possible. Because when you become yourself, fully and unapologetically, you are no longer a product of your time. You become a creator of time. The Overman is not a conqueror of others, but of the self. He is not above humanity, but beyond the smallness that keeps humanity afraid of its own potential. Nietzsche saw that most people live their lives avoiding themselves, wrapped in layers of culture, religion, politics, and distraction. They don't want freedom, they want comfort dressed up as meaning. But the Overman is different. He doesn't inherit his values, he births them. He doesn't wait to be told what life means, he gives it meaning through how he lives. And that terrifies the herd, because it means the rules they cling to aren't absolute. It means morality isn't universal. It means truth isn't handed down, it's created through the will to live authentically, fiercely, awake. You might be wondering, how do I even begin to become this Overman? Nietzsche would say, you begin by embracing the terrifying freedom of choice. You begin by accepting that there is no cosmic blueprint, no final authority, no divine checklist to validate your path. You are the sculptor and the stone. You are the question and the answer. And that means every action you take either affirms your becoming or betrays it. Every compromise chips away at your form. Every lie you tell to stay liked or accepted by society, by your family, by your past self deadens your vitality a little more. The Overman is forged not in comfort, but in the fire of self-honesty. But here's what makes this path revolutionary. Once you begin living like this, your very existence becomes a challenge to the system. A person who no longer needs approval can't be manipulated. A person who creates their own meaning doesn't fall into despair when institutions collapse. A person who lives through their own values becomes a mirror forcing others to confront the falseness of their own lives. And that's dangerous, not in the way that breaks buildings, but in the way that breaks illusions. But one truly free individual reveals that freedom is possible, and that revelation can ignite others to begin their own becoming. So I'll ask you this: what would your life look like if you stopped living it for others? If you stopped waiting for permission, stopped chasing applause, stopped outsourcing your sense of worth, what would remain if all that fell away? That shadow you glimpse in the silence, that's the beginning of the overman in you. It's not a fantasy, it's a responsibility, a calling, and it demands everything. The final rebellion, why your authentic life is the greatest threat to the modern world. If you've followed this far, you've already felt it, that quiet, radical pull towards something deeper. Not rebellion for the sake of resistance, but rebellion as an act of integrity. Nietzsche saw this clearly. The most profound threat to any society built on conformity is not chaos, not violence, not even revolution in the streets. It's the individual who lives authentically. Why? Because an authentic life is ungovernable. It cannot be predicted, programmed, or persuaded. It doesn't fit into the neat categories of left or right, good or bad, productive or useless. It simply is. And that is ness, that raw, sovereign presence, exposes the artificiality of everything around it. When you live authentically, you become a glitch in the matrix. You stop buying what others are selling, not just products, but identities, ideologies, lifestyles. You stop playing the games designed to keep you chasing validation. You see through the illusions of success, of virtue signaling, of performative morality. And the moment you stop needing those things, you become dangerous, not because you seek to destroy, but because you reveal that the emperor has no clothes. And that much of what people chase is hollow. That what they call life is often just a performance. This is the final rebellion, not against others, but against the part of yourself that still wants to be accepted more than it wants to be true. That still fears being alone more than it fears being fake. And Nietzsche's challenge is to kill that part, not with violence, but with radical honesty, with the kind of self-confrontation that burns away everything that is not yours. And when you do that, you don't just become free, you become a living invitation for others to do the same. But be warned, the world will resist you. Not because you are wrong, but because you are real. And realness disrupts everything. It makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to look at their own compromises, their own betrayals. People will project onto you. They'll call you arrogant, selfish, extreme. But don't be fooled. That's just the herd defending itself. You don't owe anyone your conformity. You owe yourself your freedom. So I ask you now, not as a challenge, but as an opening, what would it take for you to live without pretending? Without performing? Without editing yourself to fit a world that was never designed for your fullness? Can you imagine that life not as a fantasy, but as a daily practice? Because when you step into that life, you don't just leave the herd, you transcend it. You become the kind of human Nietzsche believed could redeem the future not by saving others, but by becoming a new kind of example. a human being who is no longer a reflection of society, but a reflection of the eternal will to become. You become the overman, and that changes everything.